out, Board Game Brawlers? Nick here, checking in with a special Gen Con 2013 update all about my most anticipated games being shown at the con. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Gen Con, it is the world's second largest gaming event, just behind Essenspiel in Germany. But not by much. Gen Con is getting bigger and bigger every year. And for those people that can't make it to Germany, this is definitely the next best thing. Now, when I say gaming events, I mean all kinds of tabletop gaming. Board games, card games, lots and lots of tabletop RPGing, so to speak. And everyone just comes together and has a good time, and it's but for designers and publishers, it's mainly an event to show off their wares, to show new games that have just come out, games that are coming out in the future, and perhaps to demo them, and also to sell brand new copies before they hit the marketplace. So I put together a list of the 10 games that I am most excited for that are going to be debuting for the first time at Gen Con. Now, a couple things. First off, people have been grumbling that there really weren't that many great, fantastic games coming out of Gen Con this year, and a lot of people were saying that, oh, maybe the golden age of board games is slowly coming to an end. Well, maybe it's just me, but I totally disagree. I had too many games for this list. I could have easily made a top 30 and maybe another 15 honorable mentions for games that were just decent looking but not stellar. But my point being, there seems to be a lot of interesting games, at least to me. Now, another thing is that I left off some games that are major Kickstarter games that I'm very excited about, but that I already have a lot of information about, that I've been intimately involved in the process because I'm backing them on Kickstarter. And I'm thinking of 12 Realms, Zombicide Season 2, Chaos Ball. I'm really excited for these games, but I wanted to use this list to highlight games that are really new to me, that I don't have a lot of information on, and that I think a lot of other people may not know about either. Games that I'm just very excited about and want to know more about. And finally, I just want to say that I got all the information for this list, or most of the information for this list, from a very, very awesome article on BoardGameGeek.com written by Eric Martin. It's actually a geek list of everything that's going to be shown off at Gen Con, compiled into one nice and simple list with all the information you need to know. And in fact, if you're actually going to Gen Con, it actually lists all the booth information as well. So I'm going to leave a link to that directly underneath this video for you to click on, and I urge you to do so because, like I said, there are tons of games at Gen Con. This is only my personal favorite 10. There's going to be lots and lots, dozens and dozens, hundreds of games there that might interest you. So I urge you to check that out. But without further ado, let me show you the 10 that got me most excited. So clocking in at number 10 is Lost Legends, published by Queen Games and designed by Mike Elliott. Now, this is a fantasy adventure card drafting game. And if a game involves card drafting, I'm already interested. And the fact that it's got a really cool looking fantasy theme is just icing on the cake. Supposedly you go through the game and you're actually going to be trying, with the card drafting, you're trying to gain equipment and magical items to help you defeat monsters that every one of the other players is trying to take a crack at as well. And the more and more monsters that you can defeat, the more powerful monsters that you can defeat, you're going to gain legend points, which are victory points. And I just love card drafting. I love the entire concept of trying to draft gear for your adventure to take out these monsters. And I'm really eager to see what they can do with it. That's my number 10, Lost Legends. So coming in at number 9 is Trains and Stations from WizKids and designed by Eric Lang, who I'm a big fan of. He did Warriors, and he's doing the upcoming Chaos Ball that I mentioned earlier. Now, you're not going to usually find me referring to train games very often. There's a million of them, but they're usually heavy Euros that I'm just not interested in. But in this case, there's actually 2 on this list, spoiler alert. But part of the reason I like Trains and Stations is because it's not your typical train game. It's a very light game that actually involves a lot of dice rolling. You're building your route just like you would in Ticket to Ride from one city to another and trying to score points, but you're using dice to do it and to gain special abilities. And it's actually similar to King of Tokyo, where you're rolling dice, keeping what you want, and then if you want to, you can actually spend money to re-roll dice and keep those. I really like the design of it. I really like the artwork and the board, and the way that the custom dice look, just like the Courier dice, and I'm very excited for it. That's number 9, Trains and Stations. So coming in at number 8 is actually a new game that was just announced a couple of days ago before I made this video, called Generation Hex, from a new company called Third World Studios, also designed by Eric Lang and Kevin Wilson. Now, Kevin Wilson is very famous in the board game industry for working on Arkham Horror, Descent, and Android. Now, this looks like a very interesting game. Of course, there's not much known about it, but basically the theme of the game is that you're all young wizards at an academy working to defeat other wizards in training and stuff like that, which seems like kind of a generic theme. But first of all, the artwork is fantastic. It's actually based off of a comic book that I had never heard of before called Finding Gossamer, and I'd love to see more of this art now that I've seen it once. And also the game mixes both card drafting, again card drafting, I love that, and tile placement. And the design on the cards also looks very, very nice. I urge you to check that out on Board Game Geek. And I don't know, it came out of nowhere, but I'm actually very excited about it, enough that it made my list. That's number 8, Generation Hex. At number 7, we have the other train game that I briefly touched on before, this one called simply Trains. Published by AEG and designed by Hisashi Hayashi. It's originally a Japanese game, if you couldn't tell. And, you know, much like with Trains and Stations, the reason why I'm interested in this train game is because it breaks the mold. This is actually a deck building game that also involves a board and building routes. So instead of the dice and board and building routes of Trains and Station, you have deck building and using a board to build routes. But why I place Trains above that is, first of all, I love deck building games. I'm a total sucker for it. I'm all in on deck building. I love them. And also, I've heard a tremendous amount of buzz about this game, that it is just fantastic and will break your perception of what a train game could be and should be. And this edition of the game that AEG is publishing is actually going to be revamped with new artwork, new components. Basically, those were the things that everyone was complaining about with the first edition of the game, the imported edition of the game, and they're fixing all of that. So I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to be a great game, and I can't wait to see what it's like when I actually get it in my hands in a month or so. Supposedly, they're actually going to be selling it at Gen Con, so it shouldn't be much longer now. That's my number 7, Trains. For my number 6, we have a game that the news of it just broke hours before I filmed this video. I actually had my top 10 list all set, and I had to readjust it when I found out about this game, and that's Sentinel Tactics from Greater Than Games, designed by Christopher Bedell and his whole team there. And this game kind of came out of nowhere. It's a spin-off of the Sentinels of the Multiverse card game. If you don't know about Sentinels of the Multiverse, it's a great, pure, cooperative card game where every player in the game takes control of a different superhero in their own deck of cards and fights against a villain who's on autopilot with its own deck and also an environment. I really love that game. It's in my top 10 favorite games of all time. And this game, however, is not pure cooperative. It is a team-based, competitive, miniature skirmish game where you're either taking control of teams of heroes versus a team of villains, or teams of heroes versus another team of heroes, or villains versus villains, and so on. There's not much known about it right now. They did mention that even though it's supposed to be like a miniature skirmish game, the base game does not actually have any miniatures because those are expensive to produce. And so instead there's just going to be little tokens with miniatures that can be bought and added on separately. Now, as you might guess, if you know anything about Greater Than Games, they're going to be kickstarting this project, much like all their other games, which would be Sentinels of the Multiverse and Galactic Strike Force. But the Kickstarter's not even going to start until next year. At Gen Con, they're only going to have a preview and a very early prototype. But still, even with just that little bit of information, I'm excited about it. I love any kind of tactical game, and anytime you see blank tactics in a tile, it reminds me of Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogres, which are really great tactical RPG video games. I just got another game like that called Crossmaster Arena that's got me excited about the whole genre again. So I'm already excited, and I can't wait for 2014. Sentinel Tactics, my number 6. For number 5, we have Rampage, published by Repost in association with Asmodee Productions and designed by Antoine Baza. Now, Rampage is a dexterity game where you control a giant monster and you are trying to do things like you're trying to flick around little meeples on the board and drop them and actually physically blow on the board in order to manipulate the meeples and the scenery, with the point being that you control this giant monster and you're trying to eat these meeples and gain them as points. Now here's the thing, this is typically not my kind of game. I don't like dexterity games. They're just, I mean, I don't think anyone's really good at dexterity games, so it's not really that. It's just that I think they're kind of silly and I'd rather just play a regular board game or card game. But let's go back to who designed it, and that's Antoine Baza. He is currently my favorite designer, hands down. You have Ghost Stories, Takenoko, Tokaido, even Seven Wonders, which I just think is an okay game. I'm not as hyped on it as a lot of other people are, but I can appreciate that it's a great design. And also Hanabi, which was the Spiel des Jahres winner for 2013. That guy has a resume that is killer. I love almost everything I've played of his, and just based on that, and based on the theme of this game, which is pretty cool, of giant monsters destroying the city and trying to eat meeples, based on that, I am more than willing to give this game a shot, and I'm excited for it. That's my number 5, Rampage. So Asgards Chosen is my number 4 and is published by Mayfair Games and designed by Morgan Dontonville. Now, it's actually unusual for me to sing the praises of a Mayfair game because they normally don't make the kind of games I'm into. I'm not really a fan of Settlers of Catan, believe it or not. But this game seems very, very interesting. First of all, it's based on Norse mythology, and I'm kind of a sucker for that. And it has beautiful artwork, beautiful design from everything that I've seen. You are actually all trying to appease and gain the favor of the different gods of Norse mythology and go into battle against each other. All the players are doing battle and trying to gain points by gaining the glory of the gods. But what I like also is that there's different scenarios. There's actually a solitaire mode, there's a 2-player co-op mode, and I'm always a sucker for co-op. And I just think that this game looks, it's something a bit different for Mayfair to do, and I'm very happy to see that. And I'm excited for it. I can't wait to give it a shot. That's my number 4, Asgards Chosen. Now, amongst all the fantasy and mythological and science fiction games that you're finding on this list and amongst my other reviews, something you'd probably be surprised to find is my number 3, and that's Freedom, the Underground Railroad, published by Academy Games and designed by Brian Mayer. Now, even amongst historical games, and for those who are actually into historical games a lot, this is a very unique concept. Players are actually abolitionists who are trying to lead slaves to freedom during that tumultuous time period after the Civil War. Now, I really love the theme of this game, but I've also seen the components and the design of the game and read a bit of the rule book, and it just looks fantastic. And in fact, this game is still on Kickstarter at the time that I'm doing this video. It's got another 3 or 4 days to go, and it's already funded, so it's definitely going to be made, and it will be at Gen Con for purchase and for demoing. But you should definitely check it out on Kickstarter if you have any interest in it whatsoever. I really want to see more games, maybe not necessarily made about slavery and such, but more games that look at some of the more overlooked, criminally overlooked aspects of history, because not everything should be about wars and sort of the negative thing. This is a pure cooperative game, and I think that it could be a very interesting history lesson, especially if you have a family and you're trying to find something that's not just cutesy or fantasy to get them into. So I'm really excited to see what happens with this one, and I'm glad that it's getting made. That's Freedom, the Underground Railroad, my number 3. Now, the name of the number 2 spot on my list is going to be instantly recognizable to anyone that's been involved with tabletop RPGs in the past 5 or 6 years, and that's Pathfinder Adventure Card Game. It's published by Paizo and designed by Mike Sellinger. The game has so much hype behind it, in fact, that they're actually going to be releasing an expansion at almost the same time and have several other expansions planned over the next couple of months. Now, in this game, It uses all of the same sort of themes and artwork from the Pathfinder adventure system, which is basically like a different form of Dungeons and Dragons. It's the tabletop RPG is actually Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, rethemed and reset. But in this card game, what you're actually doing is it's a cooperative game that's going to take place over a series of campaigns, just like the tabletop RPG, where each player has their own deck of cards that they're going to be using to battle the monsters and the main villain, who is you have to defeat in a certain amount of turns or else you lose. And if that sounds a little bit by Sentinels of the Multiverse, I'm sure that's intentional, but the difference here is that, like I said, it's a campaign. So actually when you defeat one part of the campaign, like a campaign module, you're going to move on to the next, and your characters are actually going to get stronger. You're actually going to be able to add equipment and spells and things like that to your deck. It's not really a deck building game per se, but you're actually permanently improving your deck as you go, assuming you do the same characters over the same campaign. And there's, like I said, there's tons of expansions already planned, so it's going to be a game that just keeps building and building on itself. And I don't know, I think the concept is awesome. I think it's taking the sensibilities of living card games, collectible card games, and mixing them together with tabletop RPGs, and I think it's kind of a brave experiment, and it's definitely got tons of people excited, including me, and I cannot wait to give it a shot. So that's number 2, Pathfinder, the adventure card game. Now, I realize by this point I've used the word exciting far too many times, dozens of times, but I'm going to use it once more, because I am very, very excited about my number 1, and that's why it's my number 1, and that's Consequential, published by Asmodee Games, not to be confused with Asmodee Games, and designed by Carl Chudik, who you might know as the designer of Innovation and Glory to Rome and a lot of others. And the reason why I'm excited about this game is because of another game that came out a year or so ago that you might have heard of called Risk Legacy. Well, Risk Legacy took the old system of Risk and threw this new mechanic in there. The new mechanic was that the game actually evolved over time. And when I say evolved, I mean that the game permanently changed. The board, the cards, the factions. I don't want to go into too much if you haven't played it because there's a lot of major spoilers. But that's part of the awesomeness of it too, that you never knew it was going to happen whenever you popped open one of the little sealed envelopes that came in the game that you only did when certain conditions were met. So what does this have to do with Consequential? Well, since Risk Legacy came out, no other game company or designer has really done anything with that mechanic. Usually when there's a very popular mechanic that comes out in a game, like deck building or trains or whatever, there's a lot of other imitators. But that hasn't really happened with Risk Legacy, except with Consequential, which seems to be the first major release to take part in that. In Consequential, there's actually going to be downloadable content released for the game every week or month or whatever. And as you go through this downloadable content, you're also going to get sealed packets and envelopes, and just like with Risk Legacy, you're going to permanently alter the game. Now, the theme of Consequential is actually kind of cool too. It's a typical fantasy theme, but it has to do with different universes and worlds, and there's this event called the Cataclysm that sort of rips everything apart and mixes magic with technology, and I'm kind of a sucker for that kind of stuff. So some of the artwork that I've seen looks really awesome too, and the design of the board and some of the bits, and I'm very, very, say it with me now, excited about this game because I love Risk Legacy. I still haven't evolved all of Risk Legacy, by the way. I have it down here on my shelf somewhere, and I've got to go through it because that whole concept is amazing, and there's my other favorite word too, and I can't wait to see it with a game that has a fantasy theme and that has come from Asmodee Games, that has done some other really cool games. And it is my number 1 for a reason, and I can't wait to see what happens with it. That's Consequential, my number 1. Well, that's going to do it for our list of the top 10 games that I'm excited about coming to Gen Con 2013. Before I forget, one of the other reasons I really am excited, quote unquote, about Consequential is that it's also a pure co-op game, and I love co-op games. I just had to throw that in there. But hopefully you found this list enjoyable, that you saw some games that you were really interested in. And if you didn't see anything that you were that interested in, hopefully this spurred you to go and check out Eric Martin's excellent geek list on BoardGameGeek.com that has dozens and dozens and hundreds of games coming to Gen Con that you may be interested in. Go ahead and follow the link underneath this video and it'll take you right to it. And thank you for watching. I can't wait to do some more reviews and update videos in the future for you to watch. Please subscribe if you can. And my name is Nick, signing off. And remember to get out there and game every day and in every way. Thanks for watching.